Joseph Oberhansley and his then 18-year-old fiancée, Sabrina Elder, welcomed a healthy son, whom they called Joseph Jr., into the world in 1998. Sabrina had lots of family around her when she gave birth since she had moved in with Oberhansley's grandmother, mother, and 13-year-old sister after the couple's tumultuous breakup. But since the deaths of his father and brother more than a year ago, Oberhansley had been struggling with substance misuse and had become irritable and impulsive. While under the influence of methamphetamines, he murdered his newborn son's mother just 5 days after the birth. His own mother was the next target, and he wound up shooting her twice. His sister was trying to escape with the baby, and he fired a shot in her direction, missing. He finally tucked the rifle under his chin and opened fire, escaping unharmed. He was taken into custody without delay and charged with first-degree murder with a $1 million bond. Joseph Oberhansley received a maximum sentence of 15 years in jail, but he will be eligible for release in just 1 year. This is despite the fact that there were several witnesses to the murder and a wealth of forensic evidence. Sadly, he would have to return to court 16 years later on entirely different counts.
Charges and allegations against me are false. That's why they won't let me talk to you people.
What do you say about the death penalty?
They're holding back all my mail. I haven't been able to receive
What do you say
any
about the
mail,
death penalty?
any phone calls, letters, anything. So for all my family and friends out there, you know why I haven't been able to respond?
How did you get the death penalty?
On March 29, 1981, Joseph Oberhansley was born in West Valley City, a suburb of Salt Lake County. Family relatives recalled Oberhansley as a sweet and gentle young man with no history of violent or disruptive conduct. When Oberhansley's older brother and father died within a few weeks of each other in 1997, his loved ones say he took it hard emotionally. He had rage issues and substance abuse as a result. He found out Sabrina Elder, his long-term girlfriend, was pregnant months later. Their happiness together, however, would not continue forever. Sabrina ended up moving in with Oberhansley's grandmother, mother, and sister, who was 13 at the time. This arrangement did not sit well with Oberhansley. On December 4, 1998, Joseph Oberhansley Jr. was born to Sabrina. The joy of having a baby wouldn't last forever, unfortunately. Oberhansley brought his meth-addled self to his grandmother's house on December 9th, just 5 days after the birth of his baby. A fight broke out between him and Sabrina, and he ultimately ended it by shooting her 5 times. The wounds Sabrina sustained were fatal. His mother had Sabrina's baby in her arms and set him down to tend to her. Oberhansley wounded her in the back and arm with his gun. His older sister, who was just 13, rapidly thawed on her feet and snatched the infant from the room as Oberhansley turned and fired a shot at her. This attempt of his failed. Then he tried to commit suicide by shooting himself in the head, but he survived with a bullet lodged in his frontal lobe. The family rushed Oberhansley to the nearest hospital, where he stayed for the better part of 3 weeks. He has been charged with first-degree murder and is being held in custody on a $1 million bond pending trial. Manslaughter is a second-degree felony, carrying a maximum sentence of 15 years in prison and parole eligibility after only 1 year, but prosecutors accepted a plea bargain to reduce the charge to manslaughter. How and why did Oberhansley receive such a minimal punishment? Okay, so let's start at the beginning. More than 90% of all convictions in the American criminal justice system are the result of plea deals. Due to a backlog of cases, even though they are innocent, some prisoners spend years in jail awaiting trial. A plea agreement can speed up the judicial process and save both parties money. When a defendant pleads guilty to a lesser charge, they often obtain a reduced sentence. On the other hand, skeptics argue that defendants, particularly those from lower socioeconomic classes who are truly innocent, often have no choice but to accept a guilty plea with a lesser sentence rather than waste time and resources they do not have, hoping the court system gets it right. Sentencing is the part of a criminal trial where the defendant's sentence is decided after they have been found guilty by the judge or jury. At a sentencing hearing, both the prosecution and the defense can present evidence to the judge, who will ultimately decide on a punishment. A violent criminal history an exceptionally cruel or depraved method of offense, premeditation, or the vulnerability of the victim are all examples of aggravating factors that prosecutors might use to argue for harsher punishments. These factors can contribute to a more severe punishment. Possible mitigating circumstances brought up by the defense include proof of extreme stress or emotional distress. For a crime of passion, for instance, was the defendant provoked? Is there any sign of a diagnosable mental or physical disorder? Did the accused show real regret? Is there any indication of a diminished intellectual capacity? Let's return to the murder trial of the Oberhansley family. The prosecution agreed to reduce the accusation from first-degree murder to manslaughter, a second-degree felony, punishable by up to 15 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000 in Utah. The defense also brought forward mitigating circumstances, such as the possibility that Oberhansley's self-inflicted brain damage could make him a more peaceful and less violent person, a beneficial injury. They claimed that his drug use and emotional distress following the deaths of his loved ones mitigated his responsibility. A district court judge revoked Oberhansley's $1 million bail on June 11, 1999, after receiving a report from a psychologist stating that Oberhansley no longer posed a suicide risk. Before his eventual parole in July 2012, he would spend 12 years behind bars. To be closer to his mother in Indiana, he applied for and was granted interstate compact parole. Indiana law enforcement would be responsible for reporting any encounters with law enforcement officers to the Utah Parole Board throughout his 2-year parole period. Oberhansley consented to go home with a woman he met in a pub in Jeffersonville, Indiana, in March 2013. This was only 9 months after he had moved to Indiana. Police were summoned after an argument broke out, as documented in court documents. When the cops arrived, a lady answered the door and yelled, "He's killing my boyfriend." Oberhansley was released on a $1,000 bond after being charged with strangling and resisting arrest. He was found guilty of speeding 2 months later. He was originally charged with driving on a suspended license back in May of 2014, but the case against him was eventually dropped. 2 months later, he faced charges of criminal recklessness with a deadly weapon and resisting arrest. The attorneys on both sides agreed to reduce the $25,000 bond to $5,000, which allowed Oberhansley's then-girlfriend Tammy Jo Blanton to post the $500 money necessary to get him out of jail after his arrest. As previously indicated, Indiana law enforcement was mandated to notify their Utah counterparts of any contact with law enforcement. Such contact would have necessitated re-evaluating his parole status and possibly leading to its revocation. Utah Board of Pardons and Parole member Greg Johnson said, "The information we had was that he was doing well." Johnson said that Indiana officials never reported any such interactions to Utah. On the other hand, Ryan Harrison, the supervisor of Indiana's 9th Parole District, said, "Everything was sent to them. Personally, I've read it. However, Oberhansley was able to avoid capture and would eventually meet his next victim through his mother. Tammy Jo Blanton was a true blue Hoosier. She was born on January 7, 1968, in Indiana. After finishing high school in 1986, she went to work for Zermid, a healthcare technology business, where she did medical billing and coding. Oberhansley's mom was the one who first introduced him to Tammy Jo Blanton. His mom said that Tammy knew about Oberhansley's criminal history and had picked him up from jail once. Tammy and Oberhansley hit it off right away, and it looked like they were going to have a wonderful marriage. He seemed nice at first, but Tammy soon noticed red flags, such as his extreme sensitivity to perceived slights. This, of course, terrified her. Her friends had their doubts about her new partner from the start. They did an online search for his name and discovered the murder in Utah. They gave Tammy the warning right away, and she took it seriously. She let her acquaintances know that she was aware of his criminal history, but that he had been evasive about the specific allegations against him. She was going to confront him about it this weekend, but little did Tammy Jo know what was in store for her. Tammy showed up for work on the morning of September 8th and told her coworkers that Oberhansley had kept her locked in the house all weekend and sexually attacked her several times. He finally let her go after she explained that her coworkers would get suspicious if she didn't show up. She said she was too scared to go home, so she made plans to stay with a friend for a bit. She chose to tell Oberhansley they were over by text message on the 10th of September, 2 days after they had broken up. "Just wanted you to know I won't be home. No one, and I mean no one, gets to terrify me like you did on Sunday. I will never forget it as long as I live." The following is a reply from Oberhansley. "Baby, we had a great dinner Saturday. Don't let the negative enter your mind. You are my soulmate. Come to me, please. Come home. Talk to me, baby." Tammy replied, "You can choose to be in denial about what happened Saturday into Sunday. I won't be in denial." She threatened to file kidnapping and rape charges against him if he did not leave the residence. The following evening, when some time had passed, Tammy went back home. Because of her request, her father and another male partner also showed up. They worked together to change the locks on every door and block them with heavy pieces of furniture. Knowing Oberhansley as well as she did, Tammy was confident that she would hear from him again. She sent her friends some reassuring text messages as she got ready for the night. One read, "At the end of the day, I'm taking my life back. I worked too hard to get here. No one will take me down." Tammy and Oberhansley would eventually cross paths for the final time. At 2:52 a.m. on September 11, 2014, Tammy called the Jeffersonville Police Department to report that her ex-boyfriend was trying to break into her house by kicking in the back door. After sending 3 officers to the residence, they eventually located Oberhansley there. While the others questioned Oberhansley, one officer went inside to speak with Tammy. He claimed to be a resident and said that he had tried to enter several times but was unable to use his key. He gave police officers identification with a false Jeffersonville address. The inability to enter the residence irritated him, and he protested repeatedly that the police always sided with the woman. Meanwhile, Tammy informed the cop that she had ended their relationship and changed the locks. She made it clear that she wanted Oberhansley out of the building immediately. It was a civil problem, they told Oberhansley as they approached him. He needs to take legal action to fix the problem. After telling him to go, they waited nearby and performed a quick perimeter check for a few minutes. Oberhansley went into his mother's bedroom at 3:30 a.m. to tell her that Tammy had changed the locks without telling him. He was also unhappy with his current employment and financial situation. He drove off after a while. A friend and co-worker of Tammy's noted later that morning that she had not arrived at work at 9 a.m. Someone else at work called Tammy's cell phone, and a man who identified himself as such said, quote, "Hey, this is Jason, Tammy's brother. Tammy's not here. She had to go take care of our sick father at his house, and she stayed overnight." Tammy's co-workers, not believing the man's story, called the police to seek a welfare check. In under 5 minutes, police had arrived at the residence. The black Ford Explorer in the driveway was the first thing they saw. Dispatch informed them that it was in Tammy Jo Blanton's name. A pair of police officers went to the front door, while a third went around back. The back door showed obvious signs of forced entry. At the front door, police officers greeted Oberhansley and asked, "Hey, buddy, why don't you go ahead and step outside?" He claimed ownership of the Ford Explorer parked in the driveway. When the fourth cop came, they told Oberhansley to put his hands on the wall so they could pat him down, but he instead reached inside his back pocket. A cop seized his wrist, and they began to exert physical control on him. He had a folding knife in his back pocket, the blade of which was already out. The knife had blood and hair on it. The police detained Oberhansley and cuffed him. As they made their way through the house, the police yelled Tammy's name. When an officer entered the bathroom, he discovered a significant quantity of blood on the floor and around the tub. The bathroom fixture that held the tub had a large piece of fabric slung over it. When police removed the sheet, they found the body of a white woman. It looked like the victim's skull had been smashed at the front, and brain matter was strewn all over the place. Officers called the detective section, and when they got there, they took over. The Jeffersonville police took Oberhansley to their station for questioning. Meanwhile, authorities carried out a search warrant and examined Tammy's body, finding many cuts to her head, face, neck, and chest. There were a number of serious incisions, including one that ran virtually the entire front length of her neck. The victim had a significant chunk of her brain and the front of her skull removed. The deputy coroner reported that the victim's heart was missing after discovering a big wound in her chest from many stab wounds. In the detective's office again, Oberhansley was Mirandized after he confirmed his knowledge of his rights. When confronted, he admitted that he had entered the house through the rear door and entered the bathroom where Tammy had locked herself. He fatally stabbed Tammy more than 25 times. He also admitted to using a jigsaw to extract some of her brain with the intention of eating it raw. He also said that he cooked up some of her brain and ate it. After his arrest, Oberhansley was taken to the Clark County Jail. There, police questioned him about what happened to Tammy's heart. He claimed he had cut out her heart and eaten it, along with some of her lung.
My name is Zeus Brown. I don't know Mr. Oberhansley.
Who is Zeus Brown?
Me. I'm Zeus Brown.
Did you commit these crimes?
I love
you,
I'm Zeus Brown.
Days later, Oberhansley was arraigned, but his case had already taken several unexpected turns. He recanted his statement, saying that authorities had identified the incorrect man and that his real name was Zeus Brown. He was transferred to a mental institution in late 2017 and wasn't declared competent to stand trial until November of 2018. The trial ultimately began in 2019, and after the prosecution and defense had presented their cases, the jury withdrew to their chambers to deliberate. However, they were unable to reach a consensus, and the trial was declared a mistrial. Following a mistrial, the prosecutor has a decision to make. He can negotiate a plea deal, drop the charges against the offender, or schedule a new trial. He decided to have him retried. A judge said he was legally incompetent to stand trial once again in 2020. Later that year, however, this decision was reversed. 6 years later, on September 18, 2020, a judge convicted Oberhansley guilty of first-degree murder and burglary. 3 days later, he was given a life sentence without parole. The Indiana Department of Corrections reports that Oberhansley is incarcerated at the Newcastle Psychiatric Unit.
Joe's very distraught, obviously. Throughout the trial, Joe thought things were going well, as did we. Joe thought he'd be acquitted, and he wasn't. So at this time, he's taking it very hard, and I think that's understandable.
Now, just moments after speaking with Bateau, Clark County Prosecutor Jeremy Mull left the courthouse. Outside, a close friend of the victim waiting on him to embrace him and say thank you, telling WLKY they faced many obstacles together over the past 6 years, but praising Mull for never giving up. That is something she says she will always be grateful for. Now, Mull said he was determined to get justice not only for the victim, Tammy Blanton, but for those friends and family.
This was something that I intended to see through, and to make sure that this man was held accountable for his actions. He was brought to justice, and he was removed from the streets. And so today that happened.